All right. I'm going to try and go through a problem that I'm having with Next.js when I have a proxy environment that uses like a reverse proxy to an ephemeral URL under the hood. I end up losing track of any image imports that I use in my application. So to kind of show what the problem is that I run into, if I do a build, we use the standard next image loader, and in order to find out the environment that I'm in, I usually use next app set asset prefix inside of our middleware, and that lets me set the environment absolute URL or the domain that my scripts and my CSS and most of the other things will come from, but it does not work with Next's image loader internally. Before, I used to write the big custom loader using file loader and URL loader, and it worked, but it's a lot of extra code, and Next's built-in image handling is a lot better in general, offers a whole lot more features. But none of my images will import, so I need a way to try to solve that. So to kind of just show the problem that I run into, I'm going to run a build here, and we'll see what the output is. Alright, so it'll create a next directory, and over here I have my staging environment up and running. And if I go and look for, let's see, what would it be? The favicon, for example. So these are all relative paths, but they don't exist in this environment currently. So when I open it, I end up getting a not found error of some kind. So I'm going to try and write a loader so that they can come from the URL, like my scripts, or all my media doesn't come through right. But if I look up something like any of my chunks, all of my chunks are coming from the ephemeral environment through the set asset prefix. So let's see. To try and solve this problem, the first thing I want to do is see how it is building it out. So this will end up in my document. So I'm going to go look at the document, and this is pretty much what the images are generating. So they're just strings here, and that's more or less the problem that I'm running into. I can only know what my asset prefix is for my bucket, but I don't know what the lambda is that it's going to be on, and any of my vanity URLs can repoint to any deployed piece of code that we have. So I need a way to make there be something in front of here, like dynamic prefix, plus the statically known URL. So the plan here is I'm going to use some kind of loader. So I've gone ahead and written out a little loader file. I'm going to go to my next config and enable this with absolute image paths loader. When I go into there, if I look up with absolute image paths, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and track down the next image loader. Once I find it inside of the next config, I'm going to grab its index. I'm going to store a copy of it. If it exists, then I'm going to replace the index with a pretty much the same loader. I'm still passing through the original test and issuer and dependency, but instead of it just being a top-level loader like that, I'm going to use the use parameter and put it on as the first loader that gets run. Whenever you use a loader, loaders typically run from right to left. So the last loader is the first run, and the first loader is the last run. So what I want to do is get whatever the image loader generates and then continue processing it further. All right, so let's get going. So what I'm going to do inside of here is, first thing I'll need to do is module.exports levels. And then what I'm thinking about doing is using a pitched loader, but to start, let's see what we get from just the loader itself. Or let's see what we have to work with. So if I just log the content and return it, this is what we'll end up getting. And the reason I want to use a pitched loader is I have a little bit more power inside of a pitched loader. So if I open up Chrome here, what I'm going to usually end up with is, if we just go and look at Webpack's loader interface, then you know, this is what a normal loader will give me. I have content, map data, any meta, and you know, you can use callbacks or other types of things, async loaders, things like that. But it's mostly for just manipulating the text, and I need to do more than manipulate the text in this case because while it will work, I would like something a little bit more robust, and this is usually where a pitched loader is quite useful. So pitching a loader allows me to reverse the order that's happening further down the chain. So to give you an example of the execution, it would be the pitches all run before, and then the loaders run however they would after the fact. And the nice thing with a pitched loader is it gives me some additional information and access to the compiler in a couple other ways that I don't think I can quite achieve through a standard loader, which is mostly just manipulating the strings. And as you can see here, I'm getting a export default because everything that a loader does, except usually for the last loader, it's all JavaScript. So CSS or anything like that, it's all module exports out, and then you would have the final loader, which would take those exports, handle them, and create a different type of side effect or emit a different type of file, and replace the JavaScript code with either nothing and Webpack shakes it out, or if it's, say, CSS modules, it would remove the export default, which is the CSS content, and it would leave export const locals, which is the locally scoped style sheet object there. And the CSS ends up in a file with a dependency added to it, so on and so forth. So I'm going to try and do something similar here with this. So we can see I'm getting an export out of it, but an export isn't exactly what I want. So instead of exporting this out like this, what I think I'm going to end up doing instead is pitching it. And then I would change this to remaining, which would give me the remaining loaders that I've got. Oh, can't spell today. So this would give me the remaining loaders in there. So if we log the remaining, and for now I'm just going to return nothing. Let's see, you can see what the remaining piece is that I get, and it pretty much pops the current one off, and it gives me the rest of the loader chain on the end of it that I would want to go off and end up using. So now I can see here, that's my loader query. So this is what Webpack ends up interpreting. It's the next image loader plus the rule set down to the resource that I'm trying to process, without the current loader on it that I'm busy dealing with. So exactly what I want to try and get out of it. So the first thing I want to do is try to make it cacheable. So I will mark it as cacheable. And then I'm going to need to know if it's the server or not, since I need to calculate the asset prefix differently depending on the environment that I'm in. So the easiest way to figure that out would be something like is server equals, and then I would say this, and we have access to the compiler inside of a pitched loader, options name, and if the compiler equals server, or I'm going to reverse it actually and say if it doesn't equal client, since there's edge runtimes and other type of runtimes there that could be implemented. So now I tap the compiler, I pull the name of it off, and only do this on the client compiler, or only give me this condition. The next thing that I'll need to do is I need to actually handle this request that's coming in. Now that I don't have the content, I need a way to go and get it. And if we look at the loader interface here, we should have something like import module. Yeah, import module. And import module will let me do something like an import, like a require or something like that. And what it'll end up giving me is the export objects already evaluated by Webpack itself, which is exactly what I want to do. So I would say the result here is going to be this dot, or it's async, so await this dot import module, and I need to make the function async. Then I would say I'm going to import module, and then what I want to do is say this dot, I would want to get the resource path, so the path to the actual module itself, or the asset that I'm going to try and get. And since this asset isn't JavaScript, when I import the module, I want to tell Webpack to handle it as if it were JavaScript, so that it doesn't pass it through another set of loaders. So there's a nice trick to do that, where we can just say Webpack, and I think it'll be JavaScript auto, so that it figures out if it's ESM or CommonJS or any other implementation. And you could also do something like require and pass something like this as well, where you could say, regardless of the extension, require it and pretend it's JavaScript and handle it as such. So import module, similar kind of concept. Then what I would want to do on the end of it is say, join this with expression to remove the rest of the any other loaders on it. And now I'm going to say strip any additional loaders that might be added, say like a Babel loader or something like that, because it's JavaScript, and only push the remaining loaders back on. So now it's going to give me the next image loader again. And even though I'm treating it as JS, nothing else is going to interfere with it. All right, so that should give me the result, and then I would want to get the content off of it. And since the content could be either one, I can say it's going to be result dot, or let's see, dot default or result, depending on how it's going to come out. And now if we log the content, let's see what the compiler gives us now. There we go. Now I'm getting the module exports out of it, and I'm getting the actual object. Now I can work with it in a more reliable manner. The easiest way to try and solve this, since what I want to do is take source and put something in front of it, is you could treat it as a string and try something with just a standard non-pitched loader like a content.replace, and you could do something like source, and then you could, let's say do something like source plus, and then you could join the remaining content onto the end of it. But that's a very hacky solution, even though it will work. So I'm going to go for something a bit more resilient and actually handle the object itself. All right, so now that I've got the content, what I need to do is take my traditional way of handling a dynamic asset prefix in either environment, and I need to create some kind of variable that will generate the prefix that I'm going to put on the front for whatever environment I go to. So I'm going to call it computed asset prefix equals, and then I'm going to check if I am the server or not. And then if I am the server, I would put this into a string set. And, or let's see, let's do template strings just for a bit easier. bit easier management here. Then for me, I use global in my middleware. And then it would be something like global dynamic asset prefix. I would want to check if it exists, because it might not exist on a local machine. If the global asset prefix exists, then I still need to ensure, since the asset prefix that I get is a URL up to my static, so it includes the origin plus the static ecom web app. So I need a way to split that off and just give me the host origin name of it. So the way I'm thinking of doing it is check if it's actually a valid URL first, and then what I should be able to do is just check if the protocols exist on it. So I'm just going to look for the double dot, there we go, the markers for if this exists or not. If this is on my index, then that's really want to check. Do I have a valid resource protocol? Is it an absolute URL that starts with http dot, :/ and not just //? And the reason is I'm planning to, if it exists and it's valid, then what I'm thinking about doing is using new URL. So to handle it, and now I would just pass this in since I know it's going to actually be a valid URL. And then what I want to get off of it is going to be just the origin. All right, so if it's a, there we go, yeah, so pull that out, that's what it would equal, and then I would say if it is not a usable URL, then I would say it's just going to be an empty string instead. So that takes care of if it's the server. Now I would want to handle the other condition, which will be if it is the client. So what I would do is something similar here, but in this case I'm going to just wrap this expression as well to ensure that it keeps working. And then I would do the same here, but instead of a global variable for the client, it's going to be the Webpack public path. So the first thing I'll do is check, is the public path, does the public path exist? If the public path does exist, is it a absolute URL? And then if so, give me the origin of the public path. Otherwise, just return something empty in its place. All right, cool. So that ought to give me my computed prefix that I want. And now once I've got all of that, I still need to now actually reconstruct the export object out of it, so this thing. So to do that, let's see, I'm going to say const constructed object equals, and I'll go object.entries, the content, and I will reduce over it. And I'm going to reduce it back into an array, actually. And there's a reason for that, because I'm mostly dealing with template strings here. So then the first thing that I would want to grab out of here is I'm going to see, the only thing I want to handle is the source. So I'm going to go if the key equals source, then I'm going to handle it differently. Otherwise, I would just say the accumulator dot push, and then what I would push into it would be something like push into it the original key value, and then I would JSON stringify the outcoming value of it so that I still get everything serialized correctly, and then I can just return the accumulator here. Now, if it's the source one, this is where I want to do something additional. So first thing I'm going to do is check if it's if there's a value, and if the value has an index of that, and if it's greater than 0. So if it is not if it's not already an absolute URL and doesn't have a valid protocol on it, then I want to put this in front of it. But if somehow I have an absolute URL in there, or if I have one of them that's an absolute URL that somehow goes to this loader, I don't want to stick another domain origin in front of it. So this just helps me do something similar like I would do over here, and only test the relative paths, which is all that I have at the moment, but just to put an extra safety check on there. So if the value is here and the value is not a valid protocol or a full protocol, what I'm going to do is redefine it. And I'm mostly going to do this just because I want to make sure I don't have any, like here I'm getting these double slashes. So this is just a trick to clean it up a bit. I'm just going to require path, and then I'm going to say that the value equals path join the value. And now this will clean out any additional slashes. And that's why I have to check if there's if it's already a URL, because if it is, it would trim one slash off of there and it would no longer be valid. So that should give it to me. I just join a single path and return the path back out. And now I need to actually handle pushing this back into the array set that I'm creating here. So to handle that, I'm going to say acc.push, and it's going to be the template string again. Oops. Yeah, I'm going to make it the template strings here. It's going to be key, colon, and then the value that I want to return out of it is going to, I'm going to use this computed asset prefix thing that I've created now, but I'm going to just stick it on like that and go plus, and then it would just be JSON stringify the value again. And that should join everything back together, and then to just short it out, I'll return the accumulator again so I don't reprocess it. Alright, so that ought to give me my reconstructed object. Now let's just see what it looks like. Make sure that I'm happy with the array that I'm getting back. There we go. Perfect. So now I've got my constructed object. It's an array of strings where all of these look fine. And then on my source, it's now a what will be a variable plus the original asset that I was after. And now I need to still make this actually be an export default object again. So what I would do is I would say, let's see, let's just call it updated equals a template string, and then inside of here I'm going to say const computed asset prefix reference. I'll make it a let, And then I'm just going to make it empty in the event that nothing is there or an error happens. And then I'm going to use a try-catch block here just in case something goes wrong with this over here. You know, if for whatever reason it's blank and index of can't run, or that method doesn't exist and I try and call it, or if somehow it gets through and my URL constructor fails, I don't want to crash Webpack. So inside of my try block, I'm pretty much just going to say that it's going to be the computed reference equals, and then I would say the computed asset prefix here. So I just go in there and set it in the event that I need to. And then I need to now deal with exporting it back out. So I would say export default. And now inside of my export, I want to, yeah, there we go. I want to join my array of strings back together, but I'm going to also just do it on a new line so that it looks how it looked before. And I will just terminate the expression there. Yes, all right, that all looks fine. And I'm going to get rid of that. And now let's see what the updated content will end up looking like. So now I'll run another build. And there we go. So now I have this added onto the top of the code. And my source is computed asset prefix plus whatever else, and I need to make it the prefix reference, so over here it would be that. Rebuild it again. And then, yeah, there we go. So now I've got now it's a export default, my asset reference, which I can now dynamically figure out over here, or worst case catch, and it remains as nothing. So string join to whatever the URL is, or whatever the existing path was. All right, so now that I've got that written, I should just be able to, yeah, return the updated content to it. And now I'm going to run another final build here and just go and check my output and see if my output is good. If the output looks correct, then I will push this over to stage. Ooh, and I want to mark it as cacheable is true, because it's a flag. And as soon as my server gives me something here, we can go into the document and we can check what these broken image links are going to look like now. And then I will deploy it up and should be able to see what the end result looks like in my proxied environments. And what I really am trying to get is not a relative URL, but an absolute one, which points to a bucket that is not the domain that I'm actually browsing the pull request through. Next is not very good with dynamic proxying of stuff. In Versal's environments, every time you update the environment or move something, a build happens and it sets the asset prefix as the absolute URL, including the domain. But if you do a reverse proxy where you're dynamically setting it, it only works up to a certain extent. And I can only pass a string to asset prefix over here, so I can't make this a function and just pass in code that's going to go in there. It's going to serialize it, and there's no way to escape out of the serialization that it applies. So the only way that I really know how to do it would be to write a pitched loader that lets me manipulate and handle how how the code actually gets exported out. All right, so server's been built. If I go to pages and document now, let's tidy the code. That is what I'm going to get. So there's my asset reference to whatever I want, followed by the icon with now computed asset reference and my resource that I want. So that ought to work. All right, so then the next step would be to commit and push this up to a pull request and see if this resolves my my missing images. All right, so it looks like the PR is built. Now I'm going to refresh the PR environment here. And that fave icon should be an absolute URL now. And there we go. And that should... Perfect. Okay, so that routes me through to a resource, and then the only thing I would want to do now is go and deploy it flat to an environment and be sure that it still works when there is no when there's no weird prefix on it. So then I will just stick it directly onto stage for the time being. Put it on stage flat. And I'll reset my my PR resources here. And when I hit stage flat, currently I think I'm already using a different loader, so these should not work anyway. Yeah, they show up to here, and if I try and open this, yeah, the resource can't be found, so it needs this new loader structure that I've created using Next Images, which deploys everything the way it's supposed to. So I just need to wait for the zip file to get copied onto a new Lambda, and then I should be able to see if this did the trick or not. So it'll take a couple minutes. It has been deployed up, and now if I go and look for my icon, I see it's on a relative path. And if I open it, perfect. All right, so works deployed, works flat, and there we go. So that fixes my problem.